Hello and welcome to Module 1 of Dyslexia. I'll discuss with you in a moment what Module 1 entails, but before we go on, just to let you know that my name's Andrew Whitehouse. You can connect with me on LinkedIn. I'm Andrew Whitehouse with a few letters after my name. I'm available on Twitter at AndrewWSEN. I think Twitter's probably the place where I do most of my social networking. Instagram, also at AndrewWSEN. You can get me at Facebook, People First Education, or Andrew Whitehouse at People First Education. And you can email me, andrew@peoplefirsteducation.com, and that's where my web presence is as well, peoplefirsteducation.com. Okay, oh, there it is. So, if you want to get to know me and find out a little bit about me, I'm a TEDx speaker. I delivered a TEDx from Disability to Superpowers, and that's available on YouTube, and it does make reference to some of the superpowers that you might find in dyslexia. So you can get that on YouTube, or you can get it on TED.com. For whatever reason, it seems easier to find on YouTube. I'm a Bamford lecturer creating autism-friendly audiology clinics. I deliver short courses at Bishop Grosseteste University and the University of Lincoln. I'm a forensic special educational needs and disability consultant. That means I work in the courts, delivering expert witness, impartial expert witness work in SEND court cases. And I do training, observations, and I'm a keynote speaker. So, just to leave that up on the screen again, if you know if you want to get hold of me, these are the places to go to. And actually, I would always be delighted to hear from you. You'll never be a pest. So there you go. So, when I put the paperwork for this together, I put a list of 4 modules. There are 4 modules plus a 5th shorter module on some specifics for EYFS, early years foundation stage. But I put the list together, and I was going to break them down into those 4 areas. So module 1 was going to be the effects of dyslexia on learning and teaching. Module 2, dyslexia and the implications for teaching. Module 3 was going to be neuroplasticity and teaching the brain to track text. And number 4 was going to be self-assessment and monitoring comprehension. When I went to put it together, I found that was quite difficult because these things all feed into each other. So what you've essentially got, although we've broken it down into 4 modules, you've got one big 4 to 5 hour module that covers all of these areas in dyslexia. So best thing you can do is start at module 1, which is what you're doing. And if you're one of the people that didn't, you'll be reminded at the beginning of module 2, 3, or 4. Okay. When I do training, and quite often when I do observations as well, I often don't get to see the fruits of my labour. I don't get to see what's happened as a result of the work that I've done. And so, I will go into an environment, or I'll have a meeting, or whatever it is, deliver some training, and people will go, oh, that's a great idea, and, people will give things a go. What I don't find out is whether it's worked. Some years ago, after the birth of not long after the birth of my 4th child, I met one of the medical professionals that looked after her in the local hospital, and we were chatting in the playground, and she said, actually, I've been wanting to have a word with you. She said, you do work with dyslexia, don't you? I said, yes, I do, yes. And she asked me what I did, and I said, well, I deliver training and interventions and try to get people reading and writing. And she said, my son has got severe dyslexia, and I'd love to talk to you about it someday. I'd love to come on one of your events. Well, at that time, as is now, I was a big fan of the NHS and the work that she'd done to help my child. And I said, no. I'll tell you what, I will deliver my day course to you, just me and you. Come around the house, bring your sandwiches, and I'll deliver the day course. And she did. And being just the two of us, we got it done by about 1 o'clock, because obviously when you've got a big group, there's more questions and things like that. And I got a text message a few weeks later, and she said, my son's just read his first book. I said, really? She said, yeah. She said, I can't lie, it's been hard going. She said, but my son's just read his first book. Let's break that down a bit. When I work with autism and ADHD, I often say, you won't have to work any harder, just work a bit smarter. This is not the case in dyslexia. There is a lot more hard work involved. But anyway, yeah, she was seeing the fruits of her labour, as I've just been discussing. So I said, would you mind putting something together for me, a little testimonial or something? And she said, absolutely, no problem at all. So she sent this along to me, and I'd like to share it with you. It has been so fantastic to find Andrew, who fully understands how my son will learn letters, words, and numbers. As a parent, when Andrew discussed the various learning strategies, I found them to be very simple and straightforward. When my 6-year-old son started using these methods, his life changed instantly. Move you along to the second page of this. It was as if an orchestra was playing the most fantastic music, and that was the first time he'd ever heard a sound. My son's eyes, his facial expression, he was amazed at what the written word could do. Not just a lot of jumbled up letters in no particular order, but words in rows and in straight lines. It's amazing. My son is able to read books. And that was Joanne, who was an NHS professional and a mother of 4. And so obviously I was delighted to hear that, because that really means a lot to me, to find that that these things are making such a massive impact. And in actual fact, I had a similar email, but this was from an adult who'd been on to one of my workshops at Bishop Grosseteste University. And I would say this lady, she was a mature student. She was sitting quite near the back of the group of about 20 students, and she was very quiet during the day, but I could see she was taking it in. She was just choosing to be quiet, tapping away on her iPad. And a couple of days later, I had an email from her to say, thank you for these strategies. I've read more in the last 2 days than I have in 3 years of university, just due to these strategies. And she sent a photo of some of the stuff she'd been doing. But isn't it fantastic? So that obviously made me very, very happy indeed. And she added, I can't wait to share this with my students. So, you know, this stuff does work. What is dyslexia? With a lot of my courses, in particular the neurological courses, I think the first major question is, what is it? Some people ask if they can just skip all this and go straight to strategy. Your major resource in your arsenal of resources is the knowledge of what's going on and why it's going on. You need to know this stuff. I can throw a load of strategies at you, but ultimately knowing why things are happening will help you more in developing your skills in dyslexia, as indeed with autism and ADHD, and it will help you more in designing your own strategies and interventions. And by the way, if anyone does, send them this way. I'm always pleased to be developing my own continuing professional development. So as you can imagine, there are a lot of dyslexia descriptions out there. So I'm going to share an amalgam of several of those descriptions from a lot of different sources. So this is one here from the British Dyslexia Association. The dyslexia is best described as a continuum of difficulties in learning to read, spell or write, which persist despite appropriate learning opportunities. These difficulties are not typical of performance in most other cognitive and academic areas. So let's unpick that, shall we? So reading, spelling and writing is where these difficulties present most. Okay? And even the best teacher giving all the normal, regular learning that are given to all their pupils and students, it will not work. In other words, we're having to do different things. They're not typical of performance in most other cognitive and academic areas. That means that it doesn't mean that this child, for example, is not very good at science and history and maths and all the other subjects as well. No, it just means reading, spelling and writing and a few spin-off things that we'll talk about in a while. But it also means that it's not linked to their academic and cognitive abilities. In other words, it's not suggesting that this child is low ability, but it's also not suggesting that this child is necessarily of a higher ability either. Okay. Comprises about 80% of all learning disabilities. That's quite a big figure, isn't it? But it is definitely, in my experience and in pretty much everything you read, it is the biggest and most common neurological diversity. Not only is it the most common neurological diversity, but it's also, along with ADHD, is one of the most common that you would get in association with another condition. Meaning, lots of people with dyslexia may also have ADHD, may also have autism, etc. So 80% of all learning disabilities, fundamentally it's a language-based disorder. And what we're going to find as we go along is that it's not just linked to written language, but it will be spoken language as well. So it's a language-based disorder, and it covers obviously more obviously written language, but it does have a massive impact on spoken language. It's not caused by a visual problem. This can be a little bit confusing for people because one of the essential professionals that you would be using or may be using in dyslexia might be an optometrist. An optometrist might well take an eye test or would take an eye test and prescribe you glasses, and then they may well in dyslexia prescribe you glasses with a prescribed color as well as lens thickness. So blue glasses, yellow glasses, lenses. So it's very understandable for people to think, oh, this is a visual problem. It is not a visual problem. It is most definitely a neurological problem. It is not based on brain damage. So we have fetal alcohol spectrum disorder is one of the workshops in this series that I've put out there for you, and that is a condition based on brain damage, whereas autism is not, and ADHD is not. Dyspraxia has a slight mix. There is a condition called acquired dyspraxia, which can occur after brain damage, i.e. a stroke or a severe head injury. And so dyslexia is all developmental. It is not caused by brain damage. It's not based on a low IQ. So this is an interesting one in itself, because there are people out there that say those dyslexics, they're just not very bright, or those dyslexics, they're hugely intelligent in other areas. It's got nothing to do with that. These are just normal, average, everyday people, if there is such a thing, who happen to have this condition. Although what we will find out is they are able to do certain other things. It's not based on poor motivational laziness. Well, no, it's not. But motivated children learn best. And so the standard of teaching, style of teaching and focus of teaching and learning will have a huge effect, either negatively or positively. Okay. So, first little directed task for you today is, I've got a video here called What is Dyslexia? It's going to go through some of the things that I've been talking about so far, but in, with a slightly different tilt on it. The video is 4.5 minutes long, and I hope you enjoy it, and we'll pause the DVD now, or pause the video now. Welcome back. I hope you enjoyed that. Some really interesting points, some of which I would like to go over with you as we're going through this this workshop. But yeah, hope you enjoyed that one. I know I did, and I was very keen that you should see it. This is a quote from the British Dyslexia Association about a person called Gemma. Gemma is dyslexic, and this is how her dyslexia affects her. And this is Gemma's own words, and I think this is pretty accurate for the majority of dyslexic people you meet. I have difficulties reading, writing, spelling. I sometimes have difficulties with maths. Just like to talk about that there. I have delivered a dyscalculia workshop for you. And one of the points we make with dyscalculia and the difference between that and dyslexia is a language-based condition, whereas dyscalculia is concept-based. So if you're having problems with maths and it's maybe things like getting numbers around the wrong way and things like that, it's more likely to be a representation of dyslexia than it is to be dyscalculia. Dyscalculia is conceptual. Sometimes I find it difficult to concentrate. I get letters and numbers mixed up, or letters or numbers mixed up. I have problems meeting deadlines or being on time. I can be quite forgetful. I have good and bad days, but I'm really good at subjects like art, music, drama, sports, building and designing. So that's interesting because quite often when I'm running the day courses, I say to people, who thinks that creativity is an intrinsic part of dyslexia? And most people will put their hands up and say, yeah, I've got some very, very creative dyslexic learners. And also dyslexia, people with dyslexia often present with having really good spatial awareness. So drama and sports, again, really crucial to that. It's a range of ability levels. And so, as I've said previously, it's not about high functioning, it's not about low functioning in other areas, it's not about high academia, low academia. It's a range of levels, and some of whom will be extremely able, but some of whom will not be. As we just said on the previous slide, many will be extremely creative, and we do have evidence for all sorts of incredibly creative people that we believe were dyslexic. Some of them are really unsubstantiated, but there are clues out there. So got to get my Beatles quote in for the day, or my Beatles reference in for the day. We believe that 3 of the Beatles, John, Paul and Ringo, were all dyslexic and obviously highly creative people. We also think Leonardo da Vinci, who was almost as good as the Beatles if we look at some of his work. But then, of course, there was less rules about writing at the time when Leonardo da Vinci was writing. But he was hugely creative, obviously. Difficulty expressing themselves, yeah, we know about that. And we know particularly in the written form. But what we are going to investigate during these 4 workshops is how they can present as being finding expression difficult in the verbal as well, and a limited vocabulary. So what we would say with people with dyslexia is we would try to use wider vocabulary with them as in spoken language as we possibly can, because if you think about it, if you are reading less, well, let's talk about vocabulary. your vocabulary comes from different sources. It comes from stuff you read, stuff you hear, and stuff you see on television and things like that. Okay, if you take out a third of that, the things you read, the potential is that you could be limiting your vocabulary by a third. Any statisticians out there, I'm very aware of the flaws in that argument, but it's a good metaphor. Probably extremely frustrated. Yes, absolutely. A lot of people with dyslexia say how frustrated they are with finding all these particular difficulties. And then emotionally damaged. Would that be a fair thing to say? I do get a lot of people, adults in particular, come up and when I'm maybe at a course somewhere and I'm setting up for something, a technician comes up to me and often says, oh, dyslexia, is it? Yes, I always struggled with reading at school and I still do now. And it's almost like they're asking you for the answer. I never get someone come up to me and say, oh, ADHD, is it? Yes, I used to go to school on a pogo stick. I still do. It just doesn't present in that way. So, you know, there's a lot of baggage there in dyslexia. And of course, as well, it can be very career restricting for people, finding it difficult to move up the next stage of their job. So, a little bit more about dyslexia. Biologically and neurologically, the brain processes are different. And I'm going to go into this in quite some detail for you so that you can see what's going on in the dyslexic brain. But they use their brain in a different way. And this could be why we perceive, or there is increased creativity in the dyslexic person, because they do think differently and they use different parts of the brain at different times to neurotypical people. Genetically, yes, it can be inherited, and we have now got some evidence of the dyslexic gene, and we do believe that it runs in the family. It can skip generations, but it always is there. It's an 80% male condition again, and these are approximate figures, obviously, but as an 80% male condition, the likelihood is going to come down the male line. But of course, there's a 20% chance it might not. Dyslexia is real. There's a lot of people out there who believe that it's not a real condition. We have fMRI scans to prove that there is a different brain process in a dyslexic person. And I think sometime, I reckon now, I'm going to be guessing now, but during around about the period 2005, there were some news stories out there saying that they'd found evidence to say that there is no evidence for dyslexia. This is not the case. Dyslexia is a very, very real condition. Okay, just enjoying my coffee. I hope you've got a nice cup of coffee in front of you, maybe a biscuit. I'm recording these from home because we're in the middle of the COVID-19 lockdown, so I've got all my home comforts here. Maybe not as many resources as I'd like, but I do have the home comforts. Dyslexia is real, but dyslexia is, by definition, it is not a sign of poor intelligence or laziness. Okay, it is not the result of impaired vision, although you can and you may or may not have impaired vision. It is not outgrown. You do not grow out of dyslexia. It is a lifelong condition. There are elements of neuroplasticity that we can manipulate, and we will be manipulating during these 4 modules, but you don't actually essentially outgrow it. And it is not seeing letters or words backward. Yes, these words may be changed around on the screen or in the text or what have you, but you're not seeing them backwards. It's being inaccurately processed in the brain. So that's just a few more little background points about dyslexia. Right. Dyslexia can create an ability to think in multi-dimensions. This creates increased sensory awareness. What on earth am I talking about now? Okay, so I'm going to take an item. This is a randomly picked up item that I have brought along today. It's a G-clamp. And we know it, we know what it is, and we've seen it before. But if you've not seen it before, you'd be trying to work out what it does, yeah, and how it works and what it looks like. And the fascinating thing is, if I was to take half of that G-clamp away, yeah, and you've never seen it before, you might be wondering what is beneath here, beneath the line of my finger. In dyslexia, people have holistic visualization. In other words, they visualize things in a holistic way. So they would be saying, well, we've got this bit here and we've got this bit here. So there would probably be a handle down there, and there would probably be another half to this where the screw piece is fitted in, and they would be correct. They might not always be correct, but they would be able to visualize something down there. And this is interesting because this has an impact on the sort of jobs that people with dyslexia are drawn to. For example, I did a few years ago delivered a workshop to a group of around about 200 dyslexic architects. You can never guess what's around the next corner, can you? And the other thing that I did was I delivered a workshop to a range of dyslexic taxi drivers. Now, what was that about? Taxi drivers, extremely good at visualizing routes and maps and pulling off the road here and there and what have you, but actually may not be as good as reading, writing or spelling. And so this creates an increased sensory awareness for people with dyslexia. They have an awareness of what's going on around them. And this is why some things that they see normally, their brain's busily trying to visualize this holistically, but actually sometimes we just need to see things as a straight flat thing. One colleague of mine says that the reading on the page for him is like the Manhattan skyline on hallucinogens. So there you go. Right, moving along. Dyslexia is a specific learning disability. This is hugely important. It's neurological in origin. This is again from the BDA. It's characterized by difficulties with accurate and or fluent word recognition and by poor spelling and decoding abilities. These difficulties typically result from a deficit in the phonological component of language that is often unexpected in relation to other cognitive abilities and the provision of effective classroom instruction, as we've said before. Now, what we are trying to say here is effective classroom instruction. So the opposite of that is ineffective classroom instruction. And what we might find is that what is effective for a whole raft of your students may not work for your dyslexic students. And so we have to change what we do. And what is worth knowing is some of the things that you do for dyslexic people will also enhance non-dyslexic people's abilities. So that's a positive, that these strategies won't do anyone any harm. And also we've hit on the word phonological in there. It's the first time we've talked about phonics today. I'm going to be talking about a lot of phonics. I'm going to be talking a lot about phonics as we go through these workshops. Okay, so phonics. So as we said, it's a disability, SPLD. We need to talk about we need to talk about the fact that under the Equality Act, reasonable, proportionate and appropriate adjustments, you have to make a reasonable adjustment. What is a reasonable adjustment? It's exactly that. We're not asking you to build a new roof or anything like that, just to make adaptations to the learning to meet the needs of that person with dyslexia. According to the Special Educational Needs and Disability Reform Bill, that the that the person with dyslexia doesn't have to be diagnosed. It may have SEND. That is the same with all conditions. If you think they're presenting with ADHD or dyslexia or dyspraxia or dyscalculia, autism or attachment disorder or anything you want, because they're presenting with that, even without a diagnosis, we have to put the right things in place. And so just like to slip back, if you've noticed I missed out Ofsted, I did that on purpose because actually it comes under a slightly different heading. But Ofsted guidelines is to be good. You have to meet the needs, interests and aspirations of individuals or groups of individuals. I think the wording slightly changed now. I recently spoke at an Ofsted conference and I spoke to an Ofsted lead there who said, yeah, it is slightly different now, but the spirit of it is pretty much the same. So if we're not giving these young people with dyslexia the interventions they need, then as far as Ofsted are concerned, we're not even good. It occurs across all races, ethnicities, and gender and socioeconomic levels. It is quite happy with whoever you are, whatever you are. It will affect anyone. There are some statistical interesting points there, though, that in gender it is 80% male, 4/5 male, but it really doesn't mind as a thing. It will affect females. It does not have a gender bias. Sorry, it does have a gender bias, but it occurs in all genders. It occurs in all known written languages, sort of. I think we should take a little learning break here. I'm going to set you a quiz. This is something that I enjoy doing when I'm running my workshops. There's always somebody who gets this, but I'm going to ask you now why dyslexia does not occur in Mandarin. So let's pause for a second and you can come back and join me when you're ready. Welcome back. So why does dyslexia not occur in Mandarin? Very simply, it is a visual language in as much as it's pictures, it's written in pictures. And so actually, we're not saying, I slightly misled you. I said that dyslexia doesn't occur in Mandarin. People who speak and read Mandarin can be dyslexic, but it probably won't present in their reading because it's a visual language, not a phonological language. Not a phonological written language. Greatest risk factor, if indeed it is a risk, if risk is the right word. If it's not, forgive me, but family history. It does run through families. Like most neurological diversities, there is a family line. So you could even jot out a little family tree. I mean, how far back you can go is generally not far for most people, just off the top of their heads. But you could go back a little bit and you could probably identify a few cases of dyslexia people within your immediate family. Preschool history of oral language delay is also a significant risk factor. So, you know, if they were speaking late or anything like that, then that, you know, or using minimal vocabulary, that would be quite an important one to sort of flag up. And when we do the EYFS workshop, I do suggest that this gets flagged up at that point. So speech delay, language delay, any kind of communication delay is a significant indicator as well as a risk factor. Boys are stupid, throw rocks at them. I sincerely hope not. I've got 2 sons and I've got 2 daughters, but my oldest daughter used to have this on her bedroom door, and slightly unpleasant way to speak about her brothers. But there is a misconception that boys writing and boys reading can be substandard to girls writing and girls reading. When we actually dig in, sometimes we find out that some of this stuff that we've looked at as not being very good is actually, there's been some quite good risks taken in this writing process. So slightly unfair. There is no real evidence to say girls or boys are better at reading or writing, but what there is evidence to say is that there are significantly more boys with dyslexia. Between 10 and 20% of children have dyslexia. I tend to err more towards 10%. I would say 10% have dyslexia, and I would say maybe 7% probably never even realise they've got dyslexia and just struggle a bit. 3% would have severe dyslexia. I would say 20% of children struggle with reading, and 75% of children with reading disabilities who are not identified until year 6 will have massive problems when they go through secondary school. And again, I've mentioned this in dyscalculia, but it's the same case, and it's worth telling you again that it does have stages where it kind of crops up and rears its head. So, for example, you might find that you didn't know someone was dyslexic until they got to secondary school, and then you might not find out they're dyslexic until they go to university or to college. The reasons behind this are quite simply because they may not have realised themselves, or they may have done, but the game gets a little bit harder. So, I can remember going from college where you maybe had to write a 500 or 1,000 word essay, and then getting into university where you maybe had a 3,000 word essay to write, and then getting into your master's where you're writing a 60,000 word dissertation. Things are getting harder and harder as the game goes on. So there are stages in dyslexia. Some features of dyslexia: faulty word recognition, poor phonics. If you're familiar with extreme male brain theory, then you'll understand the phonics thing. If not, please refer to Autism Module 1, where this is all explained. But we do have good evidence to say that that boys are not as good as phonics as girls, or male brain is not as good at phonics as female brain, as I should say, and they're more likely to read visually, and so that they will find that flashcards and things like that would help them more. Slow reading speed, poor phonological awareness, poor spelling, poor written expression, grammar and word calling errors in oral reading. So those are a few more features of dyslexia that we need to know about. We also need to remember this is a key concept. Learning to read is a key milestone for life in a literate society. I have a DVD somewhere. It's called Decoding Dyslexia. It's a super DVD, and it's from New Zealand. And there is an educational psychologist in this New Zealand DVD who says, if you lock somebody out of literacy, you are locking them out of life. And I think, yeah, it's certainly locking you out of a massive part of life. But then learning to read is not natural for many children. If we talk about the boy who at 6 years old had read his first book, we talked about right at the beginning of this workshop, his mother described him as hearing an orchestra for the first time. Yeah, literacy may not be natural, but we might have to work on it, but the benefits are great, are hugely important. Literacy development starts long before children start formal reading instruction. Yes, again, we know that children are drawn to books, are drawn to text even before they really know what they are and what they do. I'd like to talk about assessment for dyslexia, how you find out about dyslexia. This is a complicated process, and it's gonna contradict itself in places, but there is a reason for this, which I will explain as we go along. For possible dyslexia, assessment must include phonemic awareness, phonics, fluency, vocabulary, and comprehension. Screening for other learning disorders, ADHD, behavioural emotional disorders or symptoms. I would say if you get a good screening or a good assessment for any condition, the modern way and the best way is not to screen or look for dyslexia. It is to screen the whole child and in adults and the whole adult and see what is in there. Not be looking for specific things, but to see what comes out of there. It's all too easy to get a diagnosis of dyslexia and then find out that you'd missed the ADHD that was helping them, that was hindering them from concentrating. So yeah, screening further learning disorders needs to be within there. And once we've done this, we need a linkage to appropriate interventions. Again, there's no point having the label unless you're going to do something with it. Appropriate screening assessment procedures will need to include target setting to get people moving in the right direction, particularly with children, obviously, monitoring, evaluation, access arrangements for exams if agreed, and agreed marking policy across all groups. Access arrangements for exams, that is a tricky one, because we go back to the SEND Code of Practice. In the SEND Code of Practice, we say that a person who may have SEN should have the interventions. This does not include funding, and this does not include access arrangements for exams. You have to have the diagnosis for that. If I'm incorrect there, if you've knowledge otherwise, please let me know. And also when we're looking at access arrangements, if you've got extra time in an exam, extra time is the place where you are supposed to be putting in interventions. And so you can't just give them that extra 15 minutes, 20 minutes or what have you. That won't help them at all. That will just make them more frustrated. You need to give them resources, strategies, interventions that they can use. Agreed marking policy. I'm going to put some work into marking policy as we go along. I've actually put a marking policy together for you, which I think is really helpful, very dyslexic friendly and very practical. Appears high functioning. This is another indicator, but unable to get thoughts on paper. Reading achievement is below expectation. Let's take the first point there. They're unable to get thoughts on paper. We should have very basic ICT in the classrooms that allows children to get things recorded, to put things down on paper, to put things down in other forms than on paper. And so you might want to be using your webcams, your video recorders, etc., or even having a scribe or what have you. Even something simple like recording it onto an iPad, verbally recording it onto an iPad. High functioning, but unable to get it down on paper. Paper is not the only medium. Reading achievement is below expectation. Again, that expectation could be age related or academically related. And if you think, well, this child's really good at history and maths and science, they're really struggling with this, then that's one that we need to be thinking about. There's also memory difficulties, poor planning and organisation skills, apparent lack of concentration, tires easily, and performance varies from day to day. Let's look at the lack of concentration. If you're being taught in a language almost that you don't understand, the written language, then you're not going to be able to concentrate. And if the mental strain on you is going to make you tired, and this is going to cause you to have difficulties from day to day. I'd also like to flip back up there to planning and organisational skills. 50% of people with ADHD are dyslexic. Another indicator, I'm going to mention this one again and possibly one more time, history of dyslexia in the family. Okay, keep going. Screening tests are designed to give an indication of possible dyslexic difficulties. They are not diagnosis, and they are not 100% accurate. And there are loads of them out there, and they all do different things. And I will show you some examples, and then you'll realise how many of these things there are to choose from. Some are delivered by a computer, others need to be administered by a teacher. And so, you know, it's there's so many different ways, and I will, as I say, I will show you this. I did a very simple Google image search, dyslexia screening test, and this is what came up. I mean, there's, again, you know, this is the first 10 things or so that came up. 1, 2, 3, 4, 7, 8, 9, 11 things that came up, and there's no 2 that look even vaguely similar. So it really is, there's no standardized way of doing this. The next steps, some just give an estimate to the child, their position, and the fact that they're likely to have difficulties. A few more, if you get into the more detailed ones, they will give you a profile of strengths and weaknesses, which obviously then you can action plan behind that. You can decide where you're going next. Are we going to be looking at memory? Are we going to look at transposing of letters? Are we going to be looking at alternative ways of recording? Are we going to look at additional strategies to phonics? They're all there. So, you know, you really want a good in-depth one. And where the tests indicate a moderate or high probability of dyslexic difficulties, the best thing you can do then is get on for a proper diagnostic assessment. You may, in your area, find that difficult to get. You may have to pay for this. It's not cheap, but it is a good route to help. If you can do it, then I would recommend it, depending on the quality of the professional you're using. But in my experience, there's some really good people out there that will do a very, very good, in-depth, insightful job. And this will determine the precise nature of the dyslexia and the difficulties. There are many areas, there are many starting points. Okay, just having a little. Okay, next steps. Are you going to go for specialist tuition? And then if you are going to go for specialist tuition, what do you want to do with the specialist tuition? For example, are you going to cover everything? You know, are they going to look at maths difficulties? Are they going to talk about lifelong goals, lifelong aims? Are they going to help with memory strategies? Are they just going to look at the reading, writing and spelling? I would say that, you know, you've got to make a choice, and you've got to speak to that specialist tutor and say, well, you know, this is what do you plan to cover, or what, you know, you're going to be able to cover this and this. These are hugely important considerations to make, because actually, you know, with the right strategies, we can all really help with the reading, writing and spelling. It's a lot of the other stuff that gets a bit more complicated. Diagnostic assessment should always be conducted by a certified person, a chartered psychologist, one that specialises in children, a specialist teacher or an assessor with an assessment practicing certificate, and you want to know that's all in place. As I say, if we're going for a full diagnostic assessment, we really are going for a very big intervention there. When choosing an assessor, we might even want to say who, you know, what's the purpose of the assessment. So if we've got someone we're worried about going into their year 11 GCSEs, for example, that's something we want to be talking to them about and saying, we're looking for study skills, we're looking for revision skills, we're looking for discrimination skills, and we're looking for exam skills, and really get a focused plan. Over these 4 modules, you'll probably get 200 strategies and maybe, things you can try. And if you go back and throw all those at a child, you're not going to get anywhere. If you go back with a focused action plan, we're going to focus on this, this, and this, maybe 3 things. That's when you'll start to get the results. So we've got another video here, and this video is about the benefits of getting a dyslexia assessment. I will say to you, it is only one side of the story, and the person in the video is very pro assessments, but she has got a lot of information to share. It is only a short video, and I think you'll get a lot of benefit from listening to her opinions. So 4-minute video, directed task, starting from now. Please pause. Welcome back. Forgot to mention before that, this has been the second video. If if you've got the PDF handout electronically, you should be able to just click straight on that. If you don't have that, they are searchable on YouTube. And if you still have difficulties, get in touch with me and I'll just email you the links. I will sort you out there. So there we go. Interesting video there about dyslexia assessments. Dyslexia is big, huge, most common neurological disorder, and not only is it the most common one, but it covers a wide range of difficulties. We know that people with dyslexia favour the right hemisphere of the brain. So the right hemisphere of the brain is where holistic thought, intuition, creativity, art and music happens. The left hemisphere of the brain is the bit where we have analytic thought, logic, language, science and maths, and that language and literacy obviously is not being fired up in quite the same way in a dyslexic person. We always have, when you go on a training course, you always have a picture of a brain. There are several on my course. So here's some more. Now on the child at the top, we have a neurotypical reader, or what they've called a normal reader. You can see on that left hemisphere the difference. This is on the right hand side where it says left hemisphere. The top one is a dyslexic person, is a neurotypical person. The bottom one is a dyslexic person. If you go to the right hemisphere, which is unhelpfully on the left of the screen, the top one is neurotypical, the bottom one is dyslexic, and you can see almost an opposite going on where different hemispheres of the brain are being fired up on different with different people with or without dyslexia. What's interesting about that is we then know, we can draw out of that, we can see it on a day-to-day basis, different skills with different people with dyslexia. Okay, seems to be just a little bit of a struggle moving forward with this. Okay, try one more time. We're having difficulties moving this forward.
What do you mean?
It's just not going forward. Can we pause?
Yeah. You gotta stop. 3, 2, 1.
And welcome back. Sorry about that. Another little technical glitch. So reading is not a natural process. Humans are genetically and neurologically hardwired to speak. Reading and writing came much later. And so we're not hardwired for reading, and we have to learn this through a conscious effort. Brain regions developed for other functions must adapt to new demands that result from the highly complex skill of reading. So there are three major regions in the left hemisphere of the brain that carry the workload for reading in most good readers. And you can see it there. You can actually see the three on that left hemisphere in the neurotypical brain, the three most busy parts of the brain when reading. As children become good readers, more brain activity takes place in the back of the left hemisphere, which allows word recognition to become automatic. And again, you can see towards the back there's far more activity going on in that left hemisphere of the neurotypical brain than there is in the dyslexic brain. For people with dyslexia, the growing efficiency is not occurring, and you can see that in that bottom right image of the left hemisphere of a typical dyslexic brain, that it's just not showing, just not firing up in the same way. However, we can make things happen, but we do need interventions with that, and that's where we will be going with this workshop. Underactivation in critical dorsal and ventral regions in the left hemisphere of the brain constitutes a neural signature for dyslexia. So, you know, if you were to scan a brain, if that's your thing, then you'd quite easily spot typical dyslexic presentations. And that you'd find that in really sort of very early years children. Compensatory activation occurs in frontal and right hemisphere brain regions, but this does not result in accurate, efficient reading. No, it doesn't, but it does result in more accurate, efficient other things, like we talked about: music, creativity, sport, drama, all those sorts of things. Functional connectivity among critical brain regions is equally important for reading proficiency. Intensive, appropriate remedial reading therapy results in more normal brain activation patterns and better reading skills. In other words, we need to go back in and we need to teach in a very different way. And this will be coming up in the later modules. Children's abilities in this area when they come to school is influenced by biological based talent and the opportunities to learn from their preschool environment, whether that is a formal preschool environment or being at home. Just going to throw a little one at you there. Recent research just come out that children's reading ability is hugely enhanced in children who watch television with subtitles. Just thought I'd throw that in there. That's a free one. So we're coming towards the end, but we need to say children come to school very different from one another in the experience that they have had that prepares them for learning to read. And what we're trying to do is have that level playing field for all children when they start school, in order to get them into some kind of level together. So we get also a few other things that you might get with dyslexia: motor skills difficulties, processing problems, memory, particularly short-term memory issues, organizational problems, and this of course will have a massive impact on the whole curriculum and even chosen subjects and the strengths within those subjects. We need to also say that mild dyslexia can present inconsistently. Some days it's better than others. Some days, it could be anything. You could be tired, hungry, really anything. Anything could make a difference. So, before we go, I'd like to firstly apologise for that blip in the middle there, or right at the end there. We are on lockdown at the moment, and we are absolutely making our best with the IT available. And I think it's going reasonably well. Thank you for listening to Module 1. We're going to be listening to Module 2 next and watching Module 2. As we go on, we're going to get deeper and deeper into strategy, you'll be pleased to know. What I would like you to do, your directed task, is to name 4 areas of learning that could be adversely affected by having dyslexia. Thank you very much for listening. Thank you very much for being there, and we'll see you next time.